All right, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on a Sunday morning on the final day of the regional. The regional has become and will return in 2027, so it will become a big event. So we work at the moment to looking at what the next 2 years looks like as a commissioning platform. The regional for the gallery was an opportunity for us to align ourselves with an opportunity that didn't exist in the Australian arts market at the moment. So while there is regional festivals, regional galleries, regional events that do commission regional artists, there isn't a specific event from a regional gallery that is commissioning regional artists by regional curators to make work about regional Australia. So it really is highlighting and putting a spotlight significantly onto that practice. It is an exhibition that's commissioning all new work and all new research to make a valid contribution into basically helping the broader ecology understand better what regional Australia looks like and what regional Australia looks like. So Emily Potter was invited and to produce an essay for the catalogue, which is for sale in store, Regions, Features and Histories, and a bit of an intro into Emily. So Emily Potter is a professor of writing, literature and culture in the School of Communications and Creative Arts in Kew University. Her research focuses on intersections of cultural production, settler colonial legacies and environmental change, with a focus on regional Australia. She is the Chief Investigator of an Australian Research Council funded project exploring community-led practices of environmental repair across Australia, Norway and the United Kingdom. Her publications include Writing Belonging of the Millennium, Notes from the Field of a Settler Colonial Place, published by the University of Chicago, Plastic Water, The Social and Political Life of Bottled Water, published by MIT Press, and the forthcoming Shadowed Country, Reimagining Place of Historic Settler Colonial Australia, to be published by Rundam later this year. And I would like to acknowledge the people on people of the Village Mara Islamana Nation and our skills to elderly past and present, and acknowledging the all First Nations people know with us today. So enjoy Emily's lecture. There will be time for Q&A at the end, and then following the lecture at later week will be preparing part 2 of the exhibition this afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Aaron. Does that work? Is that okay? Can you hear me? Hold it, yeah, no worries, I'll hold it, all good. So thank you very much for coming along this morning on a Sunday morning. I'd like to begin by offering my acknowledgement of Country 2 to the traditional owners, of the lands and waters of the Warrnambool area, the Gunditjmara, Mara and Eastern Mar peoples, and I pay my respect to elders past and present and recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters and culture. So thank you very much for the invitation for the Warrnambool Art Gallery to contribute an essay to the regional, to the catalogue, documenting this landmark exhibition. So today I want to share some of my thinking about regions which informed my essay and that I have developed over years of thinking and writing about place and placemaking in settler colonial Australia. So I am a settler colonial person myself. I grew up in Adelaide and became familiar with a certain version of regional Australia as I drove many times back and forth between Adelaide and Melbourne. This version included long stretches of highway, yellow fields in the distance, the odd wheat silo, and small towns with quiet streets and closed-up shop fronts. There were also oddities along the way. The big koala at Dadswell Bridge on the Victorian side of the border always loomed out suddenly and marked an almost halfway point on the long drive. Closer to Adelaide, Old Tailem Town Pioneer Village announced itself with a row of rusting agricultural machinery along the Princess Highway. Its website states that it is visited by people from all over the world, but I'm sure I've never seen it open in all the times I've driven past. So I say that this is a certain version of regional Australia, not just because it is a series of impressions generated by somebody outside, only touched upon in the most superficial of ways. It is also because what I've described represents the region as a space in between 2 points on a journey, a liminal designation between urban destinations. Since Australia's colonisation, the centralising of populations and economic and administrative power in coastal cities has fed spatial imaginaries in which the regions become associated with anything beyond these. Regions were tasked with providing resources and opportunities for national growth, but were positioned as out there to the urban centres, distinct sites of cultural and environmental experiences that people in the cities remain remote from. So if we start to press on the question of what a region is, however, other stories come into view. I still often drive between Melbourne and Adelaide, but my thinking about regions has extended as I've thought with and through a range of places in which my research has been located, and I've included a few here. So there's Adelaide, the Wimmera Mallee, Venice, and the Great Australian Bight in the far west of South Australia. One answer to the question of what is a region is the multiple histories that thread through a place, as well as its connection to other places. The grand 19th century buildings along Adelaide's North Terrace were constructed from the ground of Tantania, the plains of the Red Kangaroo, in largely Italianate and Venetian styles, reflecting not just the fashion at the time, but also a recognition that the climate there was nothing like the places that the early British and German colonisers had journeyed from. Venice, a city that grew wealthy from its position at the centre of trading routes that straddled and extracted from many parts of the globe, still stands on the forests of adjacent countries. An estimated 10 million tree trunks hold up the city. To this day, there are swathes of nearby Slovenia that remain bare from this systematic deforestation 500 years ago. For much of the 20th century, the soil on Wimmera Mallee farms was enriched with phosphate taken from the small island of Nauru in the Pacific Ocean. This extraction has rendered Nauru largely stripped of its topsoil and left it highly degraded. And in the Great Australian Bight, surfers pilgrimage to the coast where 70 years ago atomic clouds drifted from the British nuclear explosions conducted hundreds of kilometres north on Anangu country. Underwater, the floor of the Bight has essentially existed unchanged for 20 million years. So this is all to say that places always carry the traces of other places and the journeys that thread across them. There is no way to entangle place from this. As I discussed in my essay for the regional, this capacity to recognise the uniqueness and specificity of place, but also its deep relationality, is described by Wanyi author Alexis Wright as central to First Peoples philosophy and self-understanding. Place extends, she explains. A particular place is not separate and just of itself. We are part of the world, all related, and all parts of the world are related for us. In this light, regions are much more than geographical and governmental designations. Where does Venice or the Wimmera Mallee begin and end, for instance? Where does this place that we meet today also begin and end? Uruk Justice Commissioner Travis Lovett's walk of truth over 486 kilometres from Portland in the Western District to Melbourne CBD suggests a powerful way of thinking about regions. According to Lovett, an intention of the walk was to open Victorian people's minds and hearts to the experience of First Peoples, including the richness that their country and communities hold. Said Lovett, "There are a lot of stories in the landscape, and we want to share and showcase these." Great. As Lovett walked for 25 days through Gunditjmara, Eastern Mar, Wadawurrung, Bunyarong and Wurundjeri country, he spotlighted the many diverse First Nations that map against settler colonial geography and constitute an expanded region networked across Australia in which no part of the continent is empty. The Western mindset works through dichotomies, here, there, past, future, absence, presence, urban, non-urban. But if we think about regions as a coming together of things, as points of connection, this mindset is challenged. Established in 2021 to examine the extent and impact of historical and ongoing systemic injustice against First Peoples in Victoria, the Uruk Commission spoke back to the long history of denying and forgetting these injustices, what W.E. Stanner called the Great Australian Silence. a call for truth-telling through culturally sensitive and First People-centred processes of engagement, listening and recording testimony. Yurok drew the experiences of different traditional owner groups together while maintaining their groundedness in place. The Commission moved around country and listened to people there rather than calling them to an administrative centre. Yurok's attention to outer metropolitan Victoria reflects the fact that the majority of colonial violence in Australia took place in frontier areas, now classified as regional, rural and remote. The unrelenting push for land and resources, which was the rationale for the colony in the first place, inevitably moved the frontier outward. This out there status of what is beyond the city, where upwards of 90% of Australians live, has enabled the majority of us to disconnect from these histories as if they belong elsewhere and to someone else. In this way, the region has a displacing function. Its designation can put uncomfortable or challenging things to the side. However, taking a regional mindset is a way to challenge the foundations of the settler colonial world, as Yurok bore witness to, the foundations that have caused much enduring destruction and suffering. Tankateld and Meetang scholar Irene Watson puts it this way: the violence of the colonial foundation was a means to an end, the creation of the Australian state. The nation embodies this ambition, but as Watson also argues, only through a constant performance that asserts its claim and requires constant maintenance. This includes the ways in which we imagine place, deploy geographies and tell stories about ourselves. There is justifiably significant attention paid to material infrastructures in the regions and endemic issues with access to transport, mobile phone, internet access and so forth. These are vital, but they are not all that we need to focus on. There are social and cultural infrastructures that also matter to regional life and futures, and these include the storytelling resources made available for communities to enable them to see, understand and imagine themselves in complex, inclusive and generative ways beyond the performance of the settler colonial state. This involves stories of the past, including stories of reckoning like Yurok has made space for. So this is a key point for me. Stories are critical to how places are made. They provide the imaginative frameworks that support material actions and shape, reinforce or contest ideologies and logics of being and doing. Human geographers use a concept of spatial imaginaries to describe the stories and ways of talking about places that transcend language as embodied performances by people in the material world. The prevailing spatial imaginaries of settler colonialism rely upon a significant amount of cultural work to maintain them, including narratives that reinforce untroubled futures, spatial control, environmental command, and the legitimacy of the colonial project. For decolonial theorists, Rowe and Tuck, the narratives which support the certainty of settler colonial claim are present, pervasive, and mostly invisible within the settler colonial consciousness. These continue to have profound effects, remaining, quote, complicit with ongoing settlement, both in everyday practices and intellectual projects, end quote. Koori author Tony Birch has written about the ways in which certain stories are spotlighted and others denied in the Western District of Victoria. His article, published in 1999, Come and See the Giant Koala, juxtaposed the celebration of this strange local icon that I earlier referred to against what he described as a palpable silence around First Nations history across this region, something that Yurok and others have worked hard to address in the intervening years, so he was writing more than 25 years ago. He counterposes the koala with Bunjil's Shelter, a significant rock art site in Gerrywood, also known as the Grampians, that has been subject to vandalism over the years and is now locked behind rusting wire for its protection. The symbolism of the wire fence lies in the containment of First Nations history and the control of dominant place stories that go hand in hand with dispossession and genocide. Historian Lyndall Ryan estimated that at the time of British colonisation, the population of First Peoples in the Western District was around 3,000. Within 15 years of European arrival, she estimates it was less than 80% of this number. It is for this reason that Biri Gubba and Mununjali author and activist Sam Watson has referred to this as sad country, profoundly shaped by violent colonial histories. But if we think regionally and in the spirit of Uruk, these histories are not isolated and not disconnected from elsewhere. They thread through this country but across to the country on which I live and work in Melbourne, Wurundjeri country, and back toward the country on which I grew up, Kaurna country in Adelaide. What made the Western District so appealing to the pastoralists when they first arrived was its resource-laden environment, with an expanse of grassy plains shaped by the Budj eruption and lava flow 30,000 years ago, and the dynamic ecological partnership of First Nations economic and social systems. These grasslands once extended to the outer limit of what is now Melbourne and across to the South Australian border, encompassing Djadjabwurrung, Watharawong, Gunditjmara, Witchabollock Ma, and Eastern Ma, and Wurundjeri Wurrung country. These grasslands are now classified as critically endangered. Estimates of remaining grasslands are as little as 1% of their extent pre-colonisation, while what remains is extremely vulnerable to continued development. So I'd now like to continue a focus on native grasslands and their vulnerability to loss. And given that we're here in a wonderful art gallery, I'd like to also introduce you to the work of Melbourne artist Linda Tegg, whose collaborative plant installations work against disappearance and affirm the liveliness of other environmental histories, place stories, and ways of living in the aftermath of settler colonisation. So this is Narri Jurang, near where I live in Melbourne's north. It's also known as the Central Creek Native Grassland. It's one of 4 grassland areas comprising the newly designated Marambubba Merri Creek Parklands, a protected corridor through 2,700 hectares of Melbourne's urban growth boundary on the city's northwestern fringe. These are remnants of the extensive grassy ecology that I just spoke about that once spread across Western Victoria, so they run all the way down to these suburbs in Melbourne. At the time of colonisation, Wurundjeri Wurrung country grasslands were home to hundreds of species of flora and fauna. As grasslands have disappeared, so has available habitat. The now protected areas of Marambubba contain over 15% of Victoria's native plant species in an area of less than 0.02% of Victoria's total, and house communities of significant and threatened native animals, including the striped legless lizard, the golden sun moth, and the critically endangered regent honeyeater. Yeah, it's just on the northwest of Melbourne. Yeah, near Reservoir. Do you know Preston? As you go north of Melbourne, the suburbs. It's in Reservoir, the suburb. Yeah. So there's a corridor that runs right from the Merri Creek down. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's in the middle of suburbia, but that photo doesn't convey that. But that's surrounded by houses. Yeah. So it's part of that extensive grassland that ran right across Western Victoria. Yeah. It's pretty amazing, and it's not very well known even in these areas, I don't think. Yeah. So according to a Wiradjuri man and biogeographer Michael Sean Fletcher, grass is at the heart of the story of the country now called Australia. As I indicated, grasslands were a lure for settler colonial pastoralists and inspired the rapid expansion and violence that unfolded. The health of these grasslands was a direct result of the careful and active management of country by traditional custodians over millennia. They were cultural landscapes, not untamed nature, yet this was not recognised by colonisers, who saw instead vacancy and economic opportunity. The complexity and more than human life of grassland ecology itself was disregarded. Prevailing European aesthetics privilege certain kinds of nature that look a particular way. This includes domesticated nature such as cut lawns, pruned trees and floral design, but also preferences for what is regarded as undomesticated, for instance in the regeneration of non-residential bushland which prioritises tree planting. Native grasses have been negatively positioned as treeless with low aesthetic appeal and are frequently confused for weeds. As Leslie Instone puts it, quote, even efforts to protect endangered native plants may come to naught in the face of desires for neatly mown and ordered landscapes, end quote. Melbourne-based settler colonial artist Linda Tegg has been working for years to subvert this narrative. Her installation works put native grasses and other plants in prominent public spaces, through a multi-stage process of cultivation, co-curation and collaboration with humans, but also with the cross-species communities that constitute the work. Teg explains, quote, "Some of my most enduring and exciting collaborations have literally begun with seeds. The plant, so often figuring as deadpan in our imaginations, quietly and sometimes spectacularly puts pressure on all that would contain it." Teg's art practice begins with questions of relationality. She asks what it means as a settler and inheritor of colonial power that is so deeply invested in environmental erasure to approach native seeds and plants differently, to centre them, work with them and be challenged by them, including the ongoing relationships that result. Her practice is to be with plants, as she says. As plant theorist John Ryan points out, plants in Western culture, and certainly their germinal origin seeds, are conventionally regarded as mute and passive with a perceived lack of mobility. Yet other cultures and even branches of Western science understand the opposite. Plants move, constantly assessing and responding to changing conditions, and they talk. The comfortable calm of plants, Ryan points out, drawing from the landmark work of biologist Jacob van Uxel, conceals a bustle of communicative transactions from the human eye. Outside the framework of positivist and Western liberal demarcations between us and a plant world over which human life has dominion, plants are lived and known as profoundly entangled with human life. Margot Neal writes from the perspective of First Nations knowledges that, quote, "plants have their own repertoire of song cycles practiced by custodians in a variety of ways as part of a cycle of survival," end quote. Their precursors, seeds, hold germinal and always present life with a temporality that works beyond, but also in relation to human action and intent. There are multiple plant realities of the present moment. Critically woven into the future of life on Earth, plants are also caught up in national, biopolitical and economic interests. No more than 5 multinational corporations own most of the world's commercial seeds, for example. Yet even within this, plants are actors that assert their own agenda. In Teg's projects that centre plants, there is always a distinct shift amongst people that these more than human works occasion, so they have impact on human communities as much as they do on the more than human world. So now to talk through a couple of Linda's projects, two of the many projects she's undertaken with plants. So the first one is this work, the 2014 work Grasslands, which was a temporary installation located in Naarm, Melbourne, which was once rich in grassy plains and wetlands fed by the Birrarung, now the Yarra River, as it reaches out to sea. It is estimated that this area contained more than 150 species of native grass at the time of colonisation. There is a particular quality of environmental amnesia to urban spaces that is amplified in settler colonial contexts. Making cities in Australia involved the physical erasure of native ecology and intervention in waterways, as well, of course, as displacement of traditional owners, but it also relied upon a visioning of urban space as forward-looking rather than looking to the past, and predicated upon the disciplining or pacification of nature. The unforgiving materials of the city landscape, concrete, stone, glass, asphalt, create surfaces and facades that impose linear forms and directed pathways for movement that privilege particular bodies and business and direct attention away from the plants and animals with which city dwellers continue to exist. This practice of modernity is also a tactic of colonisation. As humans reshape the landscape, we forget what was there before. Our newly shaped and ruined landscapes become the new reality. The State Library of Victoria may not seem representative of this tactic, but its wide rectilinear forecourt, Corinthian portico and impressive glass dome signal a colonial imaginary in which places are transposable upon others without consequence and time moves forward, erasing traces of what was. Established in 1854, early in the colony's life, the State Library of Victoria is Australia's oldest public library and one of the first free public libraries in the world. It sits on the corners of Swanston and Latrobe Streets, a busy intersection of cars, trams and pedestrians, and is well frequented by the public who tacitly honour its inclusive city mission. This includes the terraced lawns that flank the library's imposing bluestone steps, and during the day the area is peppered is peppered with bodies sitting and reclining. Nature here is very much in the background, aesthetised and instrumentalised or demonised in the case of a scavenging flock of pigeons around human activity. So Grasslands, which was a collaboration with the horticulturalist John Del Pratt and landscape architect Anthony Magan, sought to disrupt this daily scene by recreating a native grassland on the steps of the library. The project was informed by Teg's time in the State Library's visual art collection. Focusing on the early colonial depictions of Melbourne in this collection, Teg looked for insights into the local ecology in the wake of colonisation, but invariably found the reproduction of European aesthetics in the depictions of place. She said, "I became curious about what grew on the library site prior to it being built. Teg consulted natural historians and ecologists, scoured archival references and undertook ecological vegetation classes, as well as visiting and learning about remnant grassland sites in Victoria, and got to know more about how the plants were distributed and how they grow. The species chosen for the work include Banksia redrum, kangaroo grass, dichondra and dianella. Teg spent a year cultivating their seeds with Del Pratt before relocating the plants to the library forecourt. These were carefully arranged against the prevailing logic of the site, working outside the symmetry of the library's architecture and ground design. I wanted to fracture it," Teg relates. This meant resisting sight lines and clear movement paths that passively follow what is there. Instead, the grass brought a different logic to the place and encouraged alternative ways of moving through and relating to it. The grassland traverses the lawn, the steps and the forecourt area, Teg related at the time. You can see clusters in which people can potentially form their own path through. They gather here or there all over the site. These improvised encounters between people and plants are a key element of Teg's practice and illuminate the kinds of encounters that are prevented in the modern city space where human mobility over a pacified ground is prioritised. Recalling Leslie Instone's insight that native grasses make us walk differently, they suggest new body worlds for the attunement of settler bodies. Grassland activated an alternative place and an opportunity for diverse settler colonial relations with that place within the visually dominant colonial parameters of the site. The work ran for 3 weeks between October and November, after which it was disassembled and the plants rehomed in appropriate contexts. Despite this temporality, a desire for something enduring was created. According to Teg, one recurring comment of passers-by had been that this should become permanent. Said Teg, "I find it really exciting that it's instantly recognisable as something that should be preserved." The impossibility of this permanence is critical to the work, however, as it draws attention to the contingency and ongoing nature of placemaking, as well as the flawed fantasy of any kind of Edenic return in settler colonial contexts. "I accept that this landscape is an interpretation," Teg explained. "It was a landscape in flux and no one can say what was definitely there or wasn't." So now I'll move across the country to Perth to discuss a more recent project of Teg's, informed by the knowledge of Balladong Whadjuk woman and expert in medicinal plants, Vivian Hanson. This work, Wetland, was installed as part of the 2024 Perth Festival. The festival theme was Nunk, the Nunyao word for sun, with a program of works that explore questions of nourishment and care and the sun's capacity for creation and destruction. Together, Teg and Hanson cultivated and installed an Indigenous wetland in the food court area of a now empty early 2000s shopping complex, the Carillion City in Perth CBD. Zooming out from the work temporarily, it's important to consider how, just like native grasslands, wetlands have been a widespread victim of settler colonial placemaking in Australia. Across Australia's coastal hugging cities, networks of wetlands were thriving ecologies and key sources of food. Wetlands such as Bolin Bolin in the north of Melbourne, which is now urban Bulleen, were, quote, a veritable supermarket, end quote, according to Barkanji scholar and artist Zena Compston. While wetlands represent pre-colonial abundance, they also hold stories of colonial violence. In Australia, one of the first things to be denied to Indigenous communities was access to country, to our plants and traditional foods, Compston explains. The sun illuminates and brings life, but it also casts shadows. Rod Giblett has written extensively on the destruction of wetland ecologies in the making of Australian cities. Wetlands, he argues, have held an abject place in modern Western culture, coded as bad and impure in contrast to flowing water associated with vitality and life. These associations help justify the widespread destruction of wetlands in the making of Australian cities, in ignorance, initially at least, of the critical ecological role wetlands play in riparian areas. Yet this destruction also gave shape to cities. Wetlands remain a ghostly trace, a hidden water that might one day return. Drawing on the work of eco-philosopher Val Plumwood, geographer Jess McLean and her colleagues proposed the concept of shadow waters to capture the kind of waters that are privileged in settler colonial culture and those that are maligned, forgotten or exploited. They argue that surface water is the most aesthetised and celebrated water associated with health, leisure and environmental vitality, while groundwater and wetland water is suspect and neglected. It is estimated that more than 50% of Australian wetlands have been erased, either filled or drained since colonisation, and in the coastal plains of Perth, this figure is thought to be more than 80%. Despite these challenges, as Giblett reminds us, Perth is still a wetland city beyond its metropolitan centre. While the wetlands of the central business district in the inner suburbs have been destroyed, many wetlands remain in the outer metropolitan area of Perth and have been the focus of community-driven conservation efforts to reverse decades of damage. Wetland affirms this identity and brings the shadow waters of central Perth back into sight. It reminds us of the erasures that capitalist colonialism normalises and the economic links between Perth's CBD, the symbolic centre of power and capital, and the environments beyond the metropole that are key sites of mining, manufacturing and agricultural water extraction and use in Western Australia. The wealth that Western Australia's economy has generated with its most recent mining boom that peaked in the mid-2000s is referenced in the consumer haven of the shopping complex here, although this is unsettled by its recent closure. To this extent, wetland is very much about the place in which it is located. Tegg's and Hanson's intention was for this living installation to, quote, push against everything the building denies, end quote. Located amidst eerily empty shopping service counters and signs promoting pizza and Thai food, where once hungry shoppers gathered and ate, the work references a food court of a different kind and a much deeper past in which native wetlands flourished. Lush, edible, medicinal native plants that thrive before colonisation were chosen by Hanson and planted in communities throughout the footprint of the water-filled food court. They included mardu, whose red-coloured bulbous roots were a food staple, and bibul, which was used to make a sweet tea called mangite or mungite. Theorists have critiqued the absence of place specificity in the modern shopping mall, its ubiquity and atemporality, and its contribution to consumer excess and environmental exploitation. The second half of the 20th century saw an explosion of built spaces dedicated to shopping. This script largely originated in the United States and transposed to most Western and developing countries across the world. Now, however, approximately 1/3 of enclosed malls in the US have died or are dying, leaving many as stranded white elephants, much like Carillion City, which closed in 2021, and whose echoey empty thoroughfares suggest the temporality and vulnerability of all cultural forms. Layers of erasure are therefore referenced in Wetland as time emerges as a key theme of the work. The modern food court is dead and a food-rich wetland takes its place, referencing a past time but also a potential future for food, as well as an ongoing living culture and more than human world. Access to food here requires care, knowledge and relationships rather than transactions. So, towards a conclusion for my talk. Tegg's Wetland and Grassland refuse the self-affirming stories of settler colonial Australia that would seek to separate past from present, human from non-human, and to compartmentalise and disconnect ecological elements. Through place-specific work, they bring the ecological erasures that underlie settler colonial cities into embodied relation with its publics, visualising contemporary urban place as multi-layered, ancient and alive with a complex ecology that extends from the past to the now. In doing so, these works make visible the entanglements of living in a colonised country, centralising the resilience of First Nations knowledges which support remediation efforts such as Murrumbaba, and in doing so illuminate a possible future grounded in consultative cross-cultural engagements and careful relations with more than human communities. As I wrap up, I'd like to briefly touch upon the climate crisis that is also so starkly pushing against spatial imaginaries that separate places as discrete and untouchable by weathers elsewhere. This is where my essay for the regional ends too. Until recently, it was in the regions that climate change was most visibly manifesting in Australia, and is still where disproportionate impacts are felt. Almost 10 years ago, this frontline status was flagged by the Australian National Climate Council, who referred to rising temperatures as a threat multiplier to the systemic disadvantages experienced by rural and regional communities. Now, however, environmental crisis cannot be denied in the cities either, as increasingly across Australian cities, suburbs flood and heat waves intensify. The algal bloom that has been devastating coastline ecosystems from the Fleurieu Peninsula westward across South Australia throughout 2025 to now made itself distressingly present along Adelaide's metropolitan beaches over the recent summer, with large amounts of diverse sea life washed up, dead over many months. And a report just out, reported on today, in fact, indicates that the bloom is still not abating. So awful as they are, what these climate events highlight is that no place is just out there. As Alexis Wright says, places are made through their connections. Regions are here and everywhere. They are woven into our lives in dynamic ways. We need to think about regions through their connections rather than their distance. This is not to suggest that regional designations don't matter. They do, of course, for identity, for governance, for funding, but expanded regional thinking includes the capacity to recognise multiple kinds of regions and to put relationality at the heart of all these. It was catastrophic flooding on the east coast of Australia in 2022 and 2023 that sent an overload of nutrients down the river and laid the groundwork for the current ocean algal bloom in South Australia, a bloom that extended and continues to across multiple sea countries, making its toxic presence known. This is just one way in which places fold into each other. As we look to the challenges of a settler colony in an unfolding environmental crisis, it is critical that we start from this place of relationality. We need diverse stories of and through regions that enable our places and communities to thrive. Thank you very much for listening to me today.
Thanks, Emma. That was fantastic. It was really good as the curatorial team here trying to understand what it is the regionals were hoping to do. It was actually talking differently, and relationality was something that it was in our minds, but we didn't have a term for it, and relationality really brought the concept of the entire session to life. So thanks so much.
Thank you, yeah.
Is there any questions for anyone?
Hi.
You made a comment kind of a little bit at the beginning about regional spaces being able to activate them as a form of resistance. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
It stood to me, but I was a bit distracted from the
Yeah, no. There was also, a lot in there. I think by that I mean that it's thinking about the regional in a relational way refuses that separation and that distinction of here and there, and a here and there distinction that can be a power dynamic. So here is what's empowered, here's at the centre, and over there is marginal and lower down in a hierarchy of place. And so refusing to work in that kind of dichotomous sense of distance and thinking relationally, that opens up to an act of resistance for a place to not be marginalised, to like what this exhibition is doing, which is recentering Warrnambool as a major site of creative thinking, which it is. So, and talking to Aaron earlier about some of the expectations that might be put on a regional gallery to have visiting blockbuster come from elsewhere, from other centres. Why, as we were saying, why do that when you can be the centre? centre that's created and constantly created by its relations to elsewhere. I hope that answers, yeah. Thank you. I wish you could all see Linda's work, but because it's so temporary, yeah. But another one of her works that I really love that I would have talked about if I'd had a lot longer today is a Venice Biennale work she did in 2018 with architects Baracco and Wright, which was an installation of these grasslands at the Venice Biennale. So they regrew native Australian grasslands from the Western Districts in the Australian Pavilion at the Biennale, and it involved about a year-long process of biosecurity, movement of seeds to Italy to then grow off-site, to then be reseeded and planted in the Biennale, to be cultivated and curated there, to be artificially watered and lit, to then be staged, and then to be repatriated back to Australia, which didn't happen in the end because of Australia's very strict biosecurity rules. So there's this incredible temporary work of, and again, of that place in another place. I mean, it was the Western District being in Venice temporarily, and then was rescattered elsewhere because of the restrictions of biosecurity. But that was a really amazing work. That, if you ever get a chance to see it online, it's really worth looking at. Thank you for coming along today, everyone. Oh.
This whole business of trying to work regionally seems to me to be quite important. I mean, the gallery has a policy to exhibit and collect locals, if you like, regionally.
Yeah.
But the other side of that, and I think Aaron's done an interesting job with it and stuff this time round, is to have brought other regions or other people back into this region, if you like, gathering it and bringing it back rather than focusing on what exists.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I think that's been an admirable process to, as we're about to go into the back room, what we've got is a sense of somebody who's been here, gone away, come back again. And it's a big task, I think, to speak quietly as these 3 or 4 exhibitions do, as it does with the grasses. You've actually got to work at it.
Yes, that's right.
The beauty of what's up here is that you actually have to go into the spaces and think.
Yes.
Actually use your intellect a bit to see what's going on.
Yes.
So there's a nice quality of the region here, bringing other regions to us.
Yes, that's right.
It's not really a question.
No, it's great. No, and also as you're saying, the artists are bringing their journeys through where they started, where they've moved to, what they've been inspired by. They bring that here too. So that's all part of that creation of a region here. So it's very complex, and I appreciate that comment. And I do think that the exhibition is very successful in making that point.
The Europe walk as well. There's a fabulous passage out of Mitchell's diaries when he was going from Melbourne to the Grampian.
Oh yes.
That speaks about the horse-drawn carts or the ox-drawn carts leaving deep indentations in the ground as they went across the acres and acres, miles and miles of cultivated. And they were there for a decade. And the soil was so soft because it never had booze.
Incredible, isn't it?
And so when you were talking about the grasses outside the library, inside the library is this history of the grassland.
Yes. It's beautiful layering, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. Yes. And there's an interesting anecdote with that, with the State Library installation, Grasslands, where there was a public lecture that was sponsored by the Murdoch Foundation, and one of the Murdochs was there, and there was a car sponsor for it, and the cars were allowed to park on site at the State Library under the portico, and actually crushed a whole heap of the grasslands during that process. So just the symbolism of that is very powerful, I think. Thank
Well,
you.
thanks everyone.
Thank you.
If you can please join me in a round of applause.
Thank you.